You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
If you're missing your weekly Out Loud routine over the break, we wanted to let you know that we are still dropping episodes for Mamamia subscribers. So you can get full access to Out Loud, including the back catalogue of over 150 subscriber-only episodes. Subscribe to Mamamia via the link in the episode description.
Hello, Out Louders. It's me, Freedman. Holly, Jessie and I are currently on our summer break. We really are. And while we're off, we thought we'd revisit some of our favourite conversations and topics from 2023 because there were a heap of them. We hope you enjoy this best of episode of Mamamia Out Loud.
Mamamia Out Loud! I'm going to introduce you to Priya. She's a writer who lives in New York. She and her husband created what she called a geographical friendship cluster in the course of just over a year. That is, 22 of her and her husband's friends now live within walking distance of their house. In her newsletter, she described how she did it. She said that she and her husband hosted regularly so they could show off how great their neighbourhood was to all their mates. She subscribed to alerts for apartments and roommates needed ads on local property apps so she could always share them quickly with her friends. And she even signed leases on 2 different apartments to be able to sublet rooms to her friends so they could try out the neighbourhood.
She was really committed.
Really committed.
Yes.
Now, clearly, Priya is very determined. And also, clearly, this is a very inner city urban experience, right? Like you and your friends all renting and share housing and everything in the same neighborhood so you can create your own community. But it did get me thinking about proximity friendships, because there are definitely times in your life when proximity dictates your social circle. Mothers groups, workplaces, gyms. And as far as any filter for friendship goes, it's probably as effective as any other, right? Because whether or not, for example, you prioritize living in a place where you can walk to a park or a good coffee shop or a school that you want your kid to go to or a really nice bakery or whatever it is, it probably does say something about who you are. And obviously, where you can afford to live is going to be a very big teller in this as well, right? So I wanted to know if we think proximity bonds friendships and if those bonds are crucial. What do we think?
I think it does, but I need to talk about Priya for a moment because I think Priya is slightly controlling.
And she also is very, if you read the piece, which is great, but she's very much like, my neighbourhood is the best and everybody needs to know it's the best. And if you try it out, you'll know it's the best.
If Priya tried to get me an apartment near her, I would say no, thank you, Priya.
Priya's very hyper-focused on her local
having
area.
Her friends together. And I thought of a few things. I thought, imagine living in Brooklyn and not being Priya's friend, because soon it's just going to be Priya's Brooklyn. And she's just going to, she's like, I'm planning to have 1,000 friends. What is the quality of these friendships? Because there are some people that I might go, we should live near each other. It's like, there's also such thing as a sometimes friend. And I'm worried that Priya is inviting these people to live near her. And then either Priya's going to get annoying or her friend is going to get annoying and she's going to think it was better when we saw each other once a month.
It's also a very Brooklyn story. I think in certainly in Australia.
Story.
Well, in Australia or even our suburbs, you know, you can live in the same city as all your friends and be an hour's drive from them in some cities.
Yep.
What was interesting about that is the level of intentionality it required. It didn't just sort of happen accidentally.
No, and it also spoke to, I was thinking about those, I think it's 23 people in total, including her. Friendship would have to be their number one priority in terms of where they live. And that was what I couldn't get my head around, which is sad.
She said they're in their 20s and 30s. I think that's really important too, because part of what she was talking about is like she's in an apartment that's 3 bedrooms and there's 3 different people in that, living in that apartment. So it's
like the show Friends. Yeah.
Yeah, she's created that show Friends.
Because for a lot of people, in terms of your priorities when looking at a place, it's your proximity to your parents or your proximity to childcare or like so many other things.
Your priorities change as you get older.
Whereas we know research would say this is a fantastic idea for long-term health and loneliness.
It's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
Because you're basically creating your own community.
Which you had, Hol, when you used to live by the beach.
Pretty much everywhere I've lived, I think, because you're right that it's a New York story, but it's also a London story. It's a Sydney, it's a big city story, right? In that When I lived in London, I lived south of the river. My friends who lived north of the river, I'd hardly ever see them. But my friends who lived south of the river, we would get together on Sunday afternoons for drinks at the pub. You would, go for walks in the park together, like a proximity, because Australia is a little bit different in that we're a big driving culture, which isn't the case in New York or London or whatever. So you will drive to your friends. But I think that a community it's a dream for a lot of people to have friends that you can walk to their house is a big, big dream.
And this is why we have such nostalgia about the quality of our friendships in youth, because even when I still lived at home, some of my best mates were within walking distance. And I think about the accidental intimacy of the way we would hang out.
In and out of each other's houses.
Oh, and it was
knowing each other's parents.
And bumping into each other in the coffee shop queue. And I mean, I definitely had this where I used to live in Sydney. I had a group of friends who we all lived in the same suburb. And I think that the interesting thing about that too is we'd intentionally formed a community in a way because a lot of those people were immigrants of different kinds. So you don't have family networks. So it's very useful to have someone who you can call and can be at your house in 5 minutes to look after your kid if you've got to take the other one to the hospital. It's very useful to be able to have that level of network if you can have it. Does it mean that the friendships are friendships of convenience, though? I would argue not, because I think that how you meet anyone is a sort of happy accident, right? And then whether or not you get along with them and they become one of your people is probably randomized to a point. If you live in the same neighborhood, as I've said, you've probably got certain priorities in common if you chose to live there. And then if you get along, you get along. And if you don't, you don't. I think that that's probably as likely as if you met them at the gym or at work or anywhere else. So I think that the friendships can be intense. But the interesting thing is what happens when you move away. Like, do those friendships remain strong or were they proximity friendships?
I've never had that. I've never had, not since I was a little kid. I think that the role of local public schools as you get older has a big determining impact on this, because I remember I went to the local public school, my brother went to the local public high school, and all our friends did live within walking distance because you just did. I think that with the proliferation of private schools and people sending their kids to schools that are out of areas, and a lot of public schools have closed down. I mean, in my area, there's almost no public high schools left. I think that has really eroded it. And I've noticed with my kids, you just want to hope that your kid doesn't make really good friends with the kid that lives 45 minutes away or an hour away. And that's always been the case with my kids. They've almost always made friends that live far away. And that's really difficult when they want to be back and forth to each other's houses.
I suppose there's pressure on those friendships that have to be so intentional. I've got mates who live overseas. So when they're here, the pressure on the depth of the conversation and the meaning of the social outing is really taxing. And you feel as though you can't just hang out. And I guess the question is what friendship is made out of. If friendship is made out of the quantity, we used to just do things alongside each other, whether it was...
I miss that so much.
Yeah.
I miss that so much. It's the hanging out. Like, I talked to some of my friends who live at Interstate and we're like, I really want to see you so we can just hang out in a room and both look at our phones.
Yes, exactly right. And not have some deep conversation over dinner.
Into it. So obviously I live regionally now and everything's a drive away. Like, at the same time, there's quite an intense community because, there aren't a million options, I suppose, and there's not that many people. So you do bump into people at the supermarket and at the shops and at the they are friendships that form. I think when it comes to that quality thing, Jessie, is it will out. You know what I mean? Like, as in, I've lived on the other side of the world from my core group of mates I went to college with, for example, and we're still close, as in a kind of we see each other when we can, when we're in the same country close. And then I'm really close with one or two of them.
Yeah.
And the same with, say, my city friends who now, it will be coming up to 2 years since I left Sydney soon. And I'm still close with my group of friends from my old suburb, but one or two of them are people who I'd talk to, every other day or see all the time. And the rest of them are still my friends, but I'll see them at someone's birthday or a wedding. You know what I mean? I think that's inevitable whatever you do. But I think there's a lot to be said for proximity friendships at the time in your life when that's important.
Yeah, and there was one thing that Priya suggested that I thought could work for people who can't afford to move near their 23 closest friends. And that is, she said they do a once a week dinner at their house and she hosts. And every friendship group needs a host. My
They do.
problem is that none of us are hosts.
Yeah.
And the once a week dinner, she made this point, which I think is really good, which is it does not matter if we're tired. It does not matter if a kid is unwell.
If we feel antisocial.
If we
I like
feel
that.
antisocial, we just do it and we bring the same people together every single time rather than having this friend over here and that friend over there. Like bringing people together, I think is such an effective thing
She
to do.
calls it the magic juju of bringing a group of people together
Yeah.
regularly, not
Yes.
just one time.
Yeah. We need to talk about The Office 10. In a viral article in The Cut by Danielle Cohen, Cohen refers to the 3-9-1 phenomenon, the idea that a person who is normally a 3 becomes a 9 in a closed circuit environment, like a weekend group trip or a university class. But then once you're out of that environment and go into the real world, they plummet to a 1. She says that in adulthood, no environment has as great a distorting effect as the workplace. She defines an Office 10 as a person who falls somewhere between average to mildly good-looking in the world at large, but skyrockets to wildly attractive within the confines of an open concept desk plan. Office 10s rarely manage you or report to you because the closeness would disrupt it. More often than not, they're at kind of the same rung, maybe one or two higher. They don't work closely with you, and no one necessarily is full-blown crushing on the Office 10. It's just that they're here to add a little bit of spice. That's kind of what they're about. Importantly, the Office 10 is born from a combination of scarcity and proximity.
Yes.
An ordinary person becomes extraordinary, and they are desires we fabricate to make our work lives more interesting. It's quite depressing, but this made me think,
Why is it depressing?
maybe this is why so many people meet their partners at work.
Well,
Yes.
Because you're a little bit like, oh, you're really sexy. And then you leave and you're like, nah.
But the thing is that if it's going to translate into a relationship, then the 10 has to hold on the outside.
Yeah, it has to be.
Or, you know,
No,
explored.
I disagree because I think that I'm sure that there are going to be outlouders that are thinking, why are we judging people? Why are we giving people
Yeah,
numbers?
it's
It's
true.
so reductive. Let's be honest. You don't get to know someone's personality, you know, unless you are visually impaired. But the first experience of someone you have is a visual experience. And so for whatever reason, we find some people attractive and some people less attractive. We're drawn sexually to some people and not others. We then get to know their personalities. So the reason why when people were working from home and pandemics was so bad for a certain type of man, it is exactly this. A lot of people linked it to the rise of the incels because the mid-man or the one in the open market, like on Tinder, in the bar, in a closed environment, he's very good looking. There's more likely that the woman will give him the opportunity to get to know her. We're being reductive by saying women and men, but the person will get to know him. That's when you fall in love. So I would say that the holding for a lot of people is about the person because you can't stay with someone just because you think they're handsome or hot, but you have to actually like them as a person. And what the Office does is give people the chance that might not otherwise get the chance in the open market.
It's true. Because they've got high status within that closed environment, you'll make a bit of an effort to get to know them.
Jessie says this all the time. She wouldn't have dated someone who was 7 years younger than her.
No, the boxes were not ticked.
No.
You wouldn't have swiped in that situation. I love this idea, and I think there are other environments because I was thinking back to when I was single and I was like really wanting to meet somebody. And romantic comedies for my generation ruined us forever because people are always bumping into each other under umbrellas in busy city streets and being like, oh, you dropped something. And then like, oh, look at you. You're beautiful.
And then they go home and have sex.
And then they go home and have sex and then they get married. Airports, planes. I used to, when I was single, and it's not necessarily that I was desperate to meet someone and have a relationship, but it was like there's a sense of constant potential when you're in that single phase that like anything could happen today. Like I could bump into someone today who is going to change my life in some way. It doesn't happen so much when you'll bump into people who change your life in other ways. I'd get on a plane and I'd sit there, watch all the people come in and you'd look at, and I'm heterosexual, so I'd look at all the men and I'd be like, I hope he's sitting next to me. Oh, maybe we'll want to share a packet of nuts. Oh, and like what I would consider as my kind of deal breakers in that situation were different than they would have been in a bar. The standards were up and down. And then if a really good looking guy did sit next to you, you'd actually be terrified because you'd think, well, I'm going to fall asleep and I'm going to drool on you and that will be that. But it's so funny, that sense of constant potential. And when you work in lots of female environments, as we have done, I have done most of my career and so have you, Mia, like men are in such scarcity.
Yep.
That their status is immediately raised.
Immediately.
The other environment I think you find the equivalent of an Office 10 is on Kentucky or Top Deck or any kind of travel group. Because when you first get there, you look around and you go, I feel weird. I don't know these people. Within 2 days, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy's so hot and that girl's freaking beautiful. She's a supermodel. Like everything's warped because it is closed circuit.
Also a wedding.
Yes,
massively.
Yes. Because I went straight from an all-girls high school, which I don't think there's more of an example of an Office 10 than an all-girls high school.
Oh, yeah. Well, same. It would be like we always joke that the school would only employ maintenance guys who were like over 60 because like a thirsty group of hundreds of horny girls, we would just terrorize anyone who was kind of under the age of 40.
I look back on the teacher we all thought was hot and I'm like, oh, come on now, come on. But went straight from all-girls high school, then sitting in a uni tutorial when there was men, I was like, oh my God, that guy doesn't look like he's had a shower in a couple of weeks, but he is sexy. And then the other one is mixed netball. Because there's so few men. And I think they're also doing, it's scarcity, it's proximity, and it's also like you're doing something that's non-threatening to me. And so I like that. Oh, yeah. I like that very much. The other place where you find an Office 10, I find, is at a doctor's office or a hospital. So I remember going to like a GP in America when I was traveling and I was like, I have like UTI or something and this is very stressful because I'm in Texas, and went and saw a doctor and I was like, hottest man I've ever seen. Looks like Zac Efron.
Really?
But I think it's because I was in a position of need.
Oh, right. And you've got the ability to give me antibiotics. I love you.
For my stinging vagina.
Yeah.
In case I needed another reason to lie awake in the middle of the night, this week I got one. Are you ready?
Yes.
We recommended on the show a podcast called Ghost Story.
A few years ago, I started investigating my wife's family history, specifically whether my wife's great-grandfather actually committed a perfect crime. And my in-laws, well, they're not exactly thrilled about it.
If you come out with a piece that says he was a murderer, then I will be sorry that we ever said we would contribute.
So, why am I doing this? Well, the woman who was murdered, she was my wife's great-grandmother. And I think she might be haunting the house I grew up in.
Jessie and I have been listening to. I know you've been listening to it as well, Elfy.
Fucking terrifying.
And
So scary.
Really, really good. And lots of Outlouders are now listening and they've been talking to us about it. Anyway, the day that this story occurred, I had just finished listening to the last episode of that show. I really enjoyed that show and I didn't find it very scary in the moment. It's quite affecting, but I didn't find it very scary. Then that night, so my son has been having nightmares lately.
Oh, kids,
and it's not
kids can see scary things into another dimension.
So we've had a few nights lately where he comes in the night and he wants to sleep with you. And I'm like, of course, come in. So on Monday night, he got into bed with me and I said, was it a bad dream? And he said, it was a bad dream, Mum. He said, but the thing that was really bad is that when I woke up, I just sensed there was someone in the room with me.
Oh my God.
Watching me in the room.
Can't believe you're going to have to move house. That's crazy.
Exactly. So then I couldn't sleep all night because all kept going through my head is all the scary moments from that ghost story show. It's led us all to be talking about ghost stories a lot. I don't know if I've shared this with Outlouders before that I'm married, in inverted commas, into a ghost family, but I'm, as we all have to declare, as I'm sure you're about to point out, Elfy, I'm a very rational person, generally speaking. Not a believer.
I'm not a weirdo, is what
Not
you're
a
trying to
weirdo.
say. Yeah.
No offense. But then I married a weirdo. Well, actually, I hooked up with a weirdo. And Brent's mum, who is no longer with us, Julie, who's absolutely ace woman in every way, was a medium. So she spoke to dead people. And so did her mum before her, and so does her adult daughter, Brent's sister. So there is ghosty business in that family that goes back generations. And when I first met Brent, I was very like dismissive and non-believing of all this. But then as I got to know Julie and I understood that she was not like a liar, and I also saw her provide amazing comfort to some people I know who'd lost people, I had to like stop being such a...
Did she ever provide comfort to you?
Here's the thing. One of the best things that Julie ever told me, because both Julie and Brent's sister would love to tell me scary stories about all the ghosts. And sometimes she'd be like, there's one right there. Like she'd literally be, somebody's standing right there. They're wearing this. They're looking at you. And I'd just be like, shut up. I don't want to know. And when I first met Brent, I was living in a flat by myself.
Yeah.
And the person who lived there before me told me that it was haunted, this flat. And I was like, well, that's lucky because I don't believe in ghosts. But the whole time I lived there, I just kept thinking about that. Anyway, back to Julie. The best piece of advice she ever gave me was, if you don't believe, you won't see. And so she was like, don't worry about it. Because I'd be like, I think my flat's haunted and I don't want to live there anymore. And she'd say, because you don't believe, you won't see. She'd say, you might see a little something move in the corner of your eye or get a feeling of, she said, you just have to stand really strong and say, you're not welcome here, please leave. Open a window, close the window, they'll be gone.
Did you do that?
Yep.
Oh my God.
I did do that. And so Julie has kind of embedded in me, like, I don't really believe in ghosts, but should I come across any, I know what to do. Do you two now think that I have lost it?
No, because I probably am exactly the same. Like, I wish my mother-in-law spoke to ghosts, but I don't know what I got as a mother-in-law, but she's not a medium. She is far from a medium. Like, it is the most interesting topic of conversation because almost everyone will go, I don't believe in ghosts, and then have a story or have an experience that they can't quite explain. One of my close friends, like I went to her house in year 7 and it was an older house, and I went to the bathroom and just got this thing of like, you know when you're in a room you just want to run out?
Energy.
I
Bad
just
energy.
like, I just have this awful feeling and I ran out. She told me like months later the things that happened in that house. There was a vase that they'd push back on the top of the fridge and they'd push it back every night, and when they woke up it would be just like it was going to fall off the thing. They had a painting that fell off the wall, but then when you looked at it, it hadn't broken. The thing that was on the wall hadn't broken. There were footsteps, there were all these things, and then they found out, you know, what had happened in the house and someone had died before they moved in. And so I was very much interested in that. I think there's something that happens during childhood and adolescence where you're particularly
because my daughter is
excited.
currently very interested, asking a lot of questions.
It must be our way of trying to grapple with death and the afterlife, and especially if you don't have faith or you don't have something you believe in afterwards. I think you're more interested because you don't want to believe you go nowhere, maybe?
Yeah.
What do you think, Elfy?
I'm going to do the same little dance. I'm a rational person. But
don't at me.
I don't know. I feel like there's just this feeling, right? And it's what you touched on in that energy of that room. And like, I am far more inclined to listen to my head, but I think sometimes you just get a funny little belly feeling. Yeah. And I think that's true of a lot of things. I think that's true of people as well. I think you can get very deep intuitive feelings about people. I think you can get deep intuitive feelings about things like work and other mundane things in life. But then I also can't ignore that like belly feeling.
Yeah.
And I actually have a very good ghost story.
Please tell.
So one of my best friends, Katie, in high school, she used to live in this horrible house. It just had the worst energy. It was dark. It was creepy. As soon as you went in there, you felt unsafe. And so she said that one night she woke up, her dog, beautiful Labrador, Lucy, was like pawing at her bed. And Katie was like, okay, well, I'll take Lucy out because she obviously needs to pee. She went and opened the back door to the garden, and Lucy just sort of stood there. And she was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go back to bed. She said she was fully awake, watching the bottom of her bedroom door from her bed as she tried to get back to sleep. And then she saw the legs of a woman walk past her bedroom door with Lucy into the next room as Lucy looked at her.
Oh, I hate it.
And I fully believe Katie. She's one of my best friends. She would not be somebody to make things up. And she was like, I was fully awake at that point. What did she do then? She said that she just stayed awake all night, just staring at the same space, just couldn't move. She was just frozen in fear.
Oh, daylight come, daylight come, daylight come.
I was nurses who work in wards, the things that they see late at night or that they just get used to, really strange things that happen. One of my friend's mum, she was a nurse and so rational, but she woke up one morning and she opened her eyes and she thought one of her daughters was standing in front of her, wearing white and all this kind of stuff, and then went, that's not one of my daughters. And it was just someone in her bedroom. And she woke up the next day and was thrown, because she was, say, 45, 50 and never seen anything in her life, and was like, what the hell just happened? I don't know. I couldn't go on with my life.
You have to. So here's the thing. Brent tells a story which, and again, like Katie, I believe Brent. I believe him to my soul. When he was a little boy, that he saw a ghost in his bedroom, and it was a faceless woman like the one in Ghost Story.
Oh, God.
At the end of his bed. And it's part of family folklore because he screamed so loudly that his dad came running into the bedroom, and he said it's like his dad went through this woman and was like in a kind of karate chop mode, as if he's like, what's happening in my house? And the woman disappeared. Now, because of the ghosty connections in Brent's family, the way that the family folklore goes is that Brent probably has the gift, right? Because this way that Julie would have explained it is that some people can see things and some people can't.
Holly,
but
does Billy have
this is the thing, right? So because that experience was so negative and scary, he pushed the gift away.
Yep.
And so when I was pregnant with my daughter, who is my first child, someone in Brent's family said to me, you can't run away from the gift. It's in the family. And she said, you'll think that your kids are talking to their imaginary friends. Please leave my home and never tell me that story again. I had my children, and anytime they would be staring into a corner or something, I'd be waving my hand in front of their face and being like, nothing there, there's nothing there. And then bloody Billy comes into my room on Monday night when I've been all ghosted by this podcast and tells me the story about the woman who's looking at him.
Can I just say, for a little bit of scientific relevance,
yes, please do. Okay, bring us all back to earth.
Even though I accept that this has been a complete indulgence and a delight to talk about ghosts.
Sorry, everybody.
I have had sleep paralysis many times before in my life, and I don't know if you've experienced that.
No.
Yeah, a lot of people get it. It's very, very common, and I've got all these sleep disorders. I'm chock full of them. Yeah. But in sleep paralysis, you will wake up in a dream state. And very often the most common sort of hallucination, hypnagogic hallucination, I believe they're called, you wake up and you see a figure, a shadowy figure standing in your room. And I've experienced that a couple
as part
of
of your
times.
sleep paralysis.
Yes, it's very, very common.
Wow.
And they think that's where a lot of ghost things come from. They think that's where a lot of alien abduction things come from as well.
Thank
it's
God
weird.
for you, Elfy Scott.
Yeah, because you feel kind of paralysed and you're seeing something and you're just in a weird in-between state.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I want to say out loud is if we've scared you today, I'm very sorry. But if you'd like to share any ghost stories with us.
Oh,
please do. As I say, I know for people who've lost people, sometimes these kind of stories are comfort. We don't mean to in any way be really frivolous about it. But that is really interesting, Elfy. I'm going to look into that because that's an explanation, isn't it? You very often hear the story that it's a shadowy figure in the room.
Yeah.
That's all we have for today. And if you're missing us over the summer break, and frankly, who wouldn't be? I mean, I'm going to miss you both a lot. We are still releasing new episodes for our subscribers. So if you're interested and want to join us, follow the link in the show notes. And a big thank you to all our current subscribers.